Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Moreno versus Royval rematch. And so if you are new around here though and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So going into this fight, Moreno is 21-7-2 with 5 KOs and 11 submissions, and Royval is 15-7 with 4 KOs and 9 submissions. This fight is a 5-round fight in the flyweight division. Moreno's last fight was a loss via split decision versus Pantoja, and Royval's last fight was a loss via unanimous decision versus Pantoja. This is in Moreno's home country of Mexico. Royval is a southpaw and is coming in on somewhat short notice, seemingly about a month's short notice. But to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, obviously this is the rematch, and the first fight ended with Moreno winning via KO in round 1 back in 2020. It was not really a fight which, I'd imagine the majority of the fans are really wanting to see a rematch of. The first fight obviously ended via stoppage in round 1. It was a bit of an interesting stoppage. Royval seemed something, I think he popped his shoulder out or something like that, and he looked like he was in a lot of pain. But it happened right at the very end of the first round. It was a round which was a relatively, it didn't look like Moreno completely dominated that first round, but it's not, it's a fight which we've seen now and not necessarily overly excited to see again. But we've got the fight, and yeah, it's credit to him to come in on short notice. Obviously, we were supposed to see Moreno versus Albazi for the main event for this fight, and that fight was a fight which I was excited for. But Albazi had to pull out, I believe, due to a neck injury. But I'd imagine that fight will probably end up getting made further along down the line anyway. So, I respect Moreno for still wanting to be on this card as well. Obviously, this is his kind of Mexican home country UFC card. It's a return to Mexico for the UFC, and it's a card which Moreno's going to be excited to see. And there's some good other fights on this card. I'm going to speak about one in just a moment. But obviously, both Moreno and Royval are coming off of defeats versus Pantoja. The Moreno Pantoja fight was a very good fight. It was a very close fight. It was a fight which certain people were saying could have gone Moreno's way. Obviously it didn't, but it was a very close fight, and I'd imagine that fight will probably end up happening again at some point. Of course, if Moreno wins this fight, and Moreno, as the ex-champion, he's got that kind of level of experience at the top level. That's something that Royval doesn't really necessarily have, and the defeat versus Pantoja Royval's, you'd have to argue that it was a little bit of a more dominating defeat. Pantoja's to Royval's. Pantoja seemed to dominate 4 out of 5 rounds, if not 5 out of 5 rounds on the ground, to be completely honest. So, on paper, you'd have to kind of look at both of them fights and compare the two, because of them both being their most recent fights against the same guy. But like I said, to speak about this card and other fights on this card, obviously there's a couple big fights in this card. A couple of fighters returning, like Rosas Jr. I'm excited to see back, and a couple of other fights. But the co-main event, Rodriguez versus Ortega, the rematch, that's a fight which I'm very excited for, especially with the state of the featherweight division now, and the fact that Topuria has just come in as the champion. I feel like it's the perfect time for this fight to be made, this rematch to be made, for pretty much a #1 contenders fight. With Holloway moving possibly up to lightweight, and if he doesn't win against Gaethje, possibly retiring, you'd think, or maybe coming back down and fighting Topuria. You'd probably still think, though, that this Rodriguez versus Ortega fight probably is still a #1 contenders fight, in my opinion. So, this is a very important fight, this rematch, and, the first fight ended in quite controversial fashion, similar to that of the first fight between Moreno and Royval. But, it was a little bit, it was still in my opinion, it's still a better fight than the main event, in my opinion. But, Rodriguez, I think he's going to win via unanimous decision. I think it's going to be, it looked like he was having the kind of way of him on the feet in that first round of the first fight. And obviously when Ortega did put it on him and, showed his strength and got him up against the cage, he was dominating in that aspect. But I think Rodriguez is just going to be the one that's going to move around the cage better and pick off his shots better. And I don't think he's going to stop Ortega, because Ortega is very tough and it's hard to stop him. But Rodriguez, he is coming off a bad defeat versus Volkanovski, but he's also coming off a half decent submission versus Emmett, which is aged quite well. And so, I think he's the one that's going to have the more momentum at the moment. And the fact that Ortega hasn't fought since that Rodriguez first fight, I think Rodriguez is going to get the job done via a decision, unanimous decision. Then to go back onto this main event. So Moreno as a fighter, he's I'd argue that on the feet he can be a bit more patient than that of Royval. I would say he can be, but then also in other fights he can't be, and it varies of what kind of version you kind of see. And I suppose he can get drawn into opponents' fights quite a lot, and he seemed to do that versus Pantoja, and that's, in my opinion, why that first round went to Pantoja in their fight, because Pantoja just put it on him early, and Moreno looked like he was a bit flustered, a bit trying to eagerly just wildly strike to make sure he gets any kind of points or anything, and that's when he came in a bit reckless, and Pantoja managed to drop him. And I think when he gets the chance to be patient on the front foot and just try and pick his shots off in the first round, that's when he can be better. And I think that's what he did against Royval. He wasn't overly trying to put it on him early against Royval, but he just managed to pick his shots off quite nicely, eventually getting down to the ground a couple of times, and that's when eventually he did some of his best work, and that did manage to get him out. Even though it was still the first round, I'd still say his patience was still there. I mean, obviously he's got great wrestling. That jiu-jitsu of his is world class, and he's proven that, and he proves that when he goes to the ground, he's gonna be controlling and be dominant on the ground. He controls the center of the ring quite well, center of the cage quite well. He's relatively composed. I would like to think that even on the feet, he doesn't look too flustered at any point, even if he is on the back foot. But I'd say he's relatively composed. He sits down on his shots well. He is powerful in his striking. He's physically strong as well. He will push you up against the cage, and he'll hold you there. He's got solid combinations. He showed that in that Pantoja fight. He was landing clean, solid combinations quite consistently, and using his long jab very well in that fight. And that's where some of his best work was, and that's why certain people thought that he could have won that fight. He definitely does improve throughout the fight, in my opinion. He's got great stamina, great work rate, and really has showed that, like a lot of the fighters in this division kind of do. They do have that really good work rate and a good stamina. I wouldn't say Pantoja necessarily does, but Moreno definitely does, and he's got fast hands as well. Negatives, I suppose, about him, I mean, he's got quite wild striking apt points. His jab is really good. Sometimes his hooks can be a little bit wild, and then that's when his accuracy can drop a little bit. Sometimes he can load up on his strikes a bit too long. Like I say, he can be quite patient, but sometimes he's trying to knock you out of every single punch, and then he is just loading up on his strikes too long. He isn't, in my opinion, amazingly good at actually finishing fights. I think he could get into positions a slightly bit better when he has you on the ground, or possibly try and put together a bit more of a varied combination with kicks and other aspects to try and finish fights a little bit better. He has been hurt. Obviously, he was hurt versus Pantoja, and possibly that was just, like I say, I think he was just coming on a bit too eager and trying to be a bit too excitable in the first round, and that's what got him caught, that's what got him hurt. His chin can be in the air a bit. He can sometimes struggle a little bit under pressure. Obviously, I think he is quite composed under pressure, but I still believe he can struggle a bit under pressure. He can be taken down quite easily. I mean, Pantoja is amazing at getting fighters to the ground, and he showed that in both the Moreno and the Royval fight. The amount of times that he managed to get both of them to the ground is the reason why he won both the fights. And possibly you argue they get taken to the ground a bit too easily, or you just argue that Pantoja is just amazing at getting you to the ground. And Moreno, I suppose when he's striking, he does seem to lean in a bit. He has a solid guard to an extent, but he does seem to lean into his shots a bit, which is never really something I like to see, because then he is just leaning into shots coming into him. But speak about Royval as a fighter, he's good. He's got good kicking variations. He'll go to the leg, he'll go back up to the head, and I think he uses his kicking a bit better than that of Moreno. He can fight on the front foot or the back foot. He's constantly moving. He's never really going to stop, even if he's on his feet. He can be a little bit too eager at the start as well, but he's constantly moving, and he's never going to be a sitting duck target. He works well in defensive wrestling positions. He seems to get out of defensive kind of wrestling positions, which could be seen as a bad position to be in, quite well, like really well, to be fair. In that Moreno fight, he seemed to do it in the first round, and in the Pantoja fight, he seemed to constantly do it, just get out of like difficult positions that he was in on the ground quite convincingly, quite well. It's not necessarily something which judges are going to score him points for, but it just means that he's going to be less likely for him to, I suppose, get submitted. He's got solid knees. He works out well. He's got good Muay Thai. Overall he is quite a well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's got good ground and pound when he gets you to the ground, and I think he probably is a little bit more of a submission threat when he gets you to the ground. And of course, he's got very good stamina as well. The negatives you say about him, obviously, like I say, he's quite eager at the start, but his shots aren't amazingly accurate either. I think he does struggle to find range quite a lot at the start, and to be fair, throughout a lot of the fight, he struggles to find range. He's quite a rangy type fighter, but he seems to struggle to find the range earlier, and then he wants to come into range a bit too much. And I don't think it's a great recipe. He can seem a little bit uncomfortable. He hasn't got much head movement. He can walk straight onto shots when he just wants to be in close range. He stands straight on. I mean, when he's throwing his knees, then he's going to stand straight on. But he then just kind of sits and stands straight on. He can be backed up a bit. He's not as strong, and he's also able to get taken to the ground relatively convincingly as well. I think that is also because he isn't relatively as strong, and I think Pantoja most definitely had more success to get him to the ground than he did versus Moreno. And because even in that fifth round where Pantoja was really tired, he still managed to get Royval to the ground relatively easily. And so you would have to argue that he can be taken to the ground quite easily. Moreno is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Moreno will win via TKO in round 3. I think it's not going to be a stoppage victory. I think Moreno could get him with ground and pounding again, or he could land one of his solid jabs or a solid combination. I think his striking is improving, and he's, like I say, improves throughout fights in general, and I think he's going to be able to catch Royval when he's backing up and when he's just looking a bit uncomfortable and just trying to circle around the ring. And Moreno, I think he'll be able to catch him and get a stoppage in that way. And then who we could go on to fight next? Pantoja again. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Like I said, it was a great fight the first time. Albazi was supposed to be the fight, so we could end up seeing that. But if Pantoja wants to fight Albazi when Albazi comes back, then you have to kind of look at the rest of the division, and there's not too many options at the moment. There's a few decent fighters coming up, but there isn't too many options of big fights at the moment. Possibly someone like a Cape could be an option, but obviously he missed weight, I believe, in his last fight, so not entirely sure. I mean, I'd love to see Makayev fight, but I think that possibly might be a bit too soon. But so we'll have to wait and see how the division plays out. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy that video. If you did indeed like this, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.